and welcome to this session where we are going to talk about Normal People, the hit series that has given us so much love in these times of challenge. In Norway, where I am now, we are all obsessed with Normal People. It is one of the most watched drama series at the moment, and every time we meet up, we have to talk about it. So I'm very glad to be able to be here with Lenny, Normal People's director and executive producer, also known for the highly acclaimed films Room, Frank, and What Richard Did. And we have Ed, also executive producer, who have produced award-winning films such as The Favorite, Room, Lobster. There are so many, Ed. And we have Emma, also executive producer, who have produced films such as Rosie, Room, The Favorite, and many more. Welcome. I'm sure that we are many out here who are curious on how you work with Normal People. But before we start the session by watching the trailer, in one sentence, Lenny, why did you want to make it?
I fell in love with Sally's book and could really see how unusual and beautiful and powerful it would be on TV.
It was different with you. Didn't have to play any games, it was just real. I'd have done anything you wanted me to. Anyway. How are you?
Do you think about me at night when the sky is losing a light? I swear my head fills up with memories.
We used to hook up secretly.
Secretly? That's cool. That's actually really hot.
Don't tell anybody in school about this.
Like I talk to anyone at school. I'm never lonely when I'm with you.
Tell me why this has to be this heavy.
You try to act like you're friends, but you know you're not that kind of person. Just kiss me.
I feel like I'm walking around trying on 100 different versions of myself.
And how do you know what you want?
Most of the time I don't have a clue.
You must know what you feel.
Do your friends know about us?
No.
I feel like everything's changed.
You don't want to touch me, but you get to dictate who else does.
I don't really think that's what's going on here.
What is it then?
I did used to think that I could read your mind at times. I don't know, maybe that's normal.
It's not.
Do you think about, do you think about, think about?
Yes, that was the brilliant trailer. And in Normal People, we follow the love story between Marianne and Connell when they are leaping from childhood into the adult world. And it's based, as you said, on the best-selling book by Sally Rooney. Who came up with the idea of making the book into a series, Ed?
Well, we got the manuscript into Element about 2 years ago, spring 2018, and we all read it. Emma and I and Chelsea, our colleague, and Andrew, my partner, and for that. And we have a long-standing relationship with Lenny. We've pleasure and privilege of working with him on all his films, and we thought about him immediately, and he gave him the book, and he luckily and happily really saw something, and so we embarked on the journey together. The other kind of crucial partner in all of this was me. We worked very closely with Rose Gardner at BBC Films, and she received the manuscript at the same time. We have been developing conversations with friends, Sally's first novel with her, and she got the manuscript for Normal People at the same time. We were all aware that it was a very competitive environment. In other words, there were casters and producers right around the world looking to get the rights to Sally's second novel because the first one had been such a success. So in order to really bolster our case, Piers Wenger at the BBC did an ordinary thing. He basically greenlit the series on the basis of the book and Lenny's interest in it. So we were able to go back to Sally and say, look, if you give us the rights, we promise to make this already greenlit by the BBC, and Lenny will direct it. And that, I think, put us in a very strong position. Sally was a really, big fan of Lenny's work. And I think as an Irish company, we also had some advantages. It felt like, as an Irish story, an Irish company would be best placed to tell it. And that's really how it happened. So it was a wonderful kind of simple situation where we knew the show at a very early stage in its life.
It has become a huge success. Is it so that you had more than 16 million requests on BBC Three in its first week? And already mentioned, Norwegians and a lot of others are obsessed. What is it in Normal People that strikes such a chord in us, regardless borders and nationality? Emma?
I think the very simple thing about Normal People is it's a really, really well-told love story. And as much as anyone can ever be cynical about, romantic stories, everyone has a connection to a love story in some respect. And Sally created in Normal People, the novel, an incredibly detailed and truthful love story. And what we managed to bring across in the TV show, I hope, is a representation of that book, and multiple generations have been able to access the truth of the story, not because it's about millennials or because it's set in Ireland, but because at the heart of it is two people who fall in love and don't know quite how to make sense of that.
Lenny, do you think that we are more open towards this kind of stories at this specific moment in time?
I mean, it's hard to deny that people's situation at the moment and being in lockdown and there being a kind of quiet, it's an anxious time, but it's also a quiet time and a time where people are perhaps a bit more reflective about what counts and what matters and what they may be missing in terms of human contact and intimacy. It's hard to imagine that wouldn't affect the reception of a show like ours. So I'm sure it has had something to do with it. But I think, as Emma has said, it is also just a very unique version of a very powerful story structure. And I think that in the way that the novel also elicited great kind of love from its readers and became quite a thing, and that was in pre-pandemic world. There is something in there that's very special. But I do think that because we did the show in a way which is, in a sense, quite low key and very intimate in style and very truthful and quiet, perhaps it could have been lost. I mean, we always worried, would it, how would audiences who are used to a sort of faster, more energized, more hooky sort of television storytelling, how would they respond to something as quiet and thoughtful as Normal People? And maybe just that the moment that it arrived allowed it to get past the defenses that an audience may otherwise have.
The author, Sally Rooney, also wrote the script to the series. Lenny, how was it to work together to create a common vision, a common sense of ownership to the material?
Well, I think we're lucky. I'm lucky in that I work with Ed and I work with Emma and a group of people at Element Pictures who we've been working closely with for a long time. And then the great thing is that Sally is a very collaborative person and a very kind of open person. And she brought, obviously, this deep understanding of the novel, but she brought it with a great openness to the ways in which it might need to be shifted and re-emphasized and played with to make it work as a piece of television. So the working kind of group was a very happy and kind of collaborative place. And we also had a wonderful writer called Alice Birch, who is a British screenwriter and playwright. She wrote the screenplay for Lady Macbeth, the recent film, for example. But she's a very, very well-regarded young playwright in Britain, and she has a lot of screenwriting experience. So that was also very helpful for Sally, I think, because between us all, there were, all the different sorts of skills and kind of experiences necessary to preserve what was important in the novel, but also make sure that worked as a piece of screen storytelling. And it was a very, I mean, it's an overused word, but it was a very organic process. Everybody was free to feed into it. And we knew from very early on kind of tonally where we wanted to be. And so it became a really enjoyable collaboration. And it's very important to us that Sally felt and does feel at the end of the process that we did something that's true to her novel and that she can be proud of. And that's something that we all are very happy about.
Ed, how involved were the broadcasters in this process?
Well, we started developing the project, with BBC. So Rose Garnett and Tommy Bulfin, who was our commissioning editor, and Piers Wenger, who's the head of drama. I mean, they were. I think they really let us get on with it. Largely, they gave us some kind of directions. Like, for instance, they wanted us to, whatever we did to make the show in one so to adapt the book in one iteration. But they were very sort of open to how we went about that. In other words, they didn't have any strong views on how long each episode should be, what the duration should be. It was initially commissioned for BBC Three, which is a digital channel, so it doesn't have the same kind of sort of strictures as a terrestrial channel. So they were very open about that and kind of let us think about how we wanted to do it. And we hit on the idea of the kind of half hours, 12 half hours, telling the story in 12 half hours. But as we went through the process with them, it was a really excellent engagement. They obviously read script, they had views on casting, but always in a very supportive environment, and always in a kind of always knowing that we were moving ahead to make it and we had a date. I mean, I think the other thing is that we have certainly with Rose Garnett a long history, making films with her in particular over the years. We made Room together, a whole bunch of movies. So that kind of relationship is really strong, and obviously really helps. So there's a good deal of trust there. And then Hulu, who are our other main broadcast partner, joined the show early in 2019. So it was sort of a lot of the kind of developmental decisions around script and writers and all that kind of stuff had been made at that point. And we were on the cusp of making casting decisions. And again, a very civilized, supportive engagement from them. I think they, both sets of broadcasters really understood what we were trying to do. They absolutely loved the book. They had great trust in Lenny. And we all kind of pulled together. And I think we were, very, I think they also recognized that kind of honoring the specificity of the book in terms of its kind of the fact that it's set in Ireland, that it's, a particular story set in a particular place and time. They were all very happy for us to kind of lean into that. So any of the small anxieties we had around having to kind of, make gestures towards the fact that this was a show being commissioned by a British and an Irish show being commissioned by a British and then an American broadcaster, they were never issues. They were always, very supportive of us kind of leaning into the kind of Irishness, if you like. And very supportive all the way through, I have to say. So no, I think we were blessed, actually.
It seems like trust is a key word for success here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, there was a huge deal of trust, I think. Yeah.
And obviously, the actors, Daisy Edgar-Jones and Paul Mescal, who are playing Marianne and Connell, they are doing such an impressive job. There must have been trust in that collaboration as well. But Lenny, what was it about Daisy and Paul that made you choose them?
I mean, they were easy choices because they were just so wonderfully good. I mean, in a very simple way, Paul. We saw Paul very early in the casting process, probably within the first couple of weeks of putting out the call for self-tapes via Louise Kiley, who's our excellent casting director. And Paul's version of Connell, Emma saw it first and said, watch this, and I watched it and I agreed with her. He just seemed to completely embody the character. He feels true to the small town Irish setting that we all know quite well. He captures the complexity and the intensity of the character. Just everything about it was exciting to watch. And then it took us quite a while to find his opposite, to find Daisy's to find Daisy, because you know, you're not just casting a Marianne, you're casting a Marianne that works with a Connell that you already have. So I think Daisy arrived probably a couple of months later, and at that point we were nearing, you know, getting perilously close to pre-production, and you always have that anxiety that you're not going to find your key cast. And Daisy, when we finally saw Daisy, she just had that. She brought a combination that is so difficult of sort of spikiness, but also vulnerability and again complexity, and is clearly just a great actress. So we brought them together then in Dublin, and that was very moving, you know, in that way that, I mean, you are looking to be moved and excited in the room in the way that you hope that people will be when they see these characters on screen. And that's the only way. There's no great, I think, in casting other than to open yourself up to what it is in front of you, what's happening, and how it makes you feel. And then you have to trust that if it makes you feel, you know, compelled and interested and fascinated in the room, then that will translate onto the screen.
We follow them from their teens and into their early 20s. How did you, Lenny, work with them through these phases?
Yes, and the other interesting, you know, the other thing is because we shot it as if we were shooting a feature. At least each block was shot. So my 6 episodes were shot as if we were shooting a feature. So we were moving all the time between different phases, even within the same day. Sometimes different phases of the story. Well, again, it's we did rehearse. We talked a lot. We talked a lot about the development of the characters and the arc of the characters across the whole series. And I think by the time we came to shooting, the guys were very, very agile in how they moved between the different phases. And it's really also remarkable. I mean, for example, costume, Laura Marie Mugan did an amazing job, and just putting the character in the clothes that are the clothes for that period, particularly with Marianne. It's such a transformation in how she looks, and she just she would walk differently, she held herself differently, and hair also was a you know, a factor. And you know, all of those things combined, just the nature of the scenes, the way they're behaving, the way they're dressed and styled, and then that inner skill that great actors have, which is to just embody a different moment in a character's development. It's amazing to watch as a filmmaker, because you know, they would just walk out on set as 2 years older, or sometimes 3 or 4 years older, and you just felt that change.
They did, as I said, impressive job, and they obviously dared to express themselves. And we have to talk about the sex. 44 minutes of sex. The raunchiest of ever, some say. What do you think? I mean, is it too explicit, Emma?
Well, no, I think it isn't too explicit. I mean, I think that one of the things that really struck me about the book when I first read it was how detailed and how engaging the writing of the sex was. And I think that made a big impact on a lot of us when we first read the book, that it's not just, you know, a love story that's you know, it talks about the way that these two characters connect sexually with as much interest in what that means to them as how they talk to each other. And I think it was really important that that line of communication of what they have when they sleep together was expressed in the series, because in a way, Marianne and Connell have a kind of, they get there much more quickly with their sexual connection than they do sometimes with their verbal connection. So having that on screen was really important. And I think we also really wanted to look at kind of, you know, we're very conscious of how sex is kind of depicted in other shows, and teenage sex, and kind of a lot of the time the kind of early interactions between teenagers is played for comedy. You know, it's kind of bumbling and funny, and you know, the kind of, it's played for laughs, or it's kind of more sort of nihilistic. So we wanted to find something that felt tender and truthful, and allowed us to see what it looked like when two young people started sleeping together. And I think that we felt that the amount of what you saw was justified by the storytelling that was in those scenes.
I thought it was beautiful. But Lenny, how did you work with them to make them feel comfortable and safe?
I think that there's no shortcut to getting to the point where people feel comfortable and safe. You have to build a relationship, I think, and that starts from the moment you start the audition process and begin to have those encounters with the actors, and then it continues through all of these times when we meet. And I like to be around them, not in a formal rehearsal process, but just as people talking, going through their fittings, chatting to them about scenes, and just being generally part of their process. And then so you're trying to build up trust, and and you have to really be open, and you have to really be trustworthy, I think, to be trusted. There's no trick. It's just, care about them, and then hopefully they can feel that. And then everybody else around, Ed and Emma and all the people involved in the crew, everybody's very sort of, I think it's a pretty warm group. So that helps. Then we talked a lot about, why is it so important to show the intimacy, so that the actors themselves feel an ownership of what work those scenes are doing in terms of communication, and that they participate in the thinking around that sort of candor and the use of nudity, and so we talked about life drawing, we talked about painting, we looked at images, beautiful images of nudes, and we talked about how valuable and beautiful those things are, and then we discussed how we might be able to make those images. And I think everybody working in that way, where you're looking at something that you're trying to create as a group, again, it means that the actors aren't isolated on the other side of the camera as the people that everybody ultimately is focusing on. We also worked in the sort of detailed working out of the scenes and in the methodology about how to rehearse them and stage them. We worked with a woman called Ita O'Brien, who's an intimacy coordinator. It's a new role, and one that I hadn't really heard about before this, but I highly recommend to other productions to really think about this seriously if you do have intimate scenes, because Ita's just very good at creating an environment where everybody's using the same language and the same ways of sort of talking, which are I don't know, they just allow for a kind of collaborative, trusting environment. And then she's also great at the mechanics, how to make something look very intimate while still allowing the actors to preserve some sort of have their own space and their own boundaries being very clear. So there was a whole bunch of things, I think, from the production as a whole. There was a willingness to create, to spend the time necessary to create an environment and a way of working that makes the actors feel safe. And then, involving the actors in every decision. And I think that does lead to a sort of truthfulness and a kind of candidness that you couldn't get otherwise. And I think the other thing that's worth saying is, when you ask the question, is there too much sex? I think the only way that the answer would be yes would be in the same way that you might ask, is there too much talking, or is there too much, laughing in a show? Because the answer is, if it's doing something interesting and valid, then no, there isn't too much. But that applies to every aspect of what you put on screen. And my hope is that we what we're doing all the time is telling the inner story of these two characters, and that gets told in all these different ways and through all these different sorts of scenes.
Yeah, good answer. I also love it when you create the room for the characters to breathe and to think, because then I feel as a viewer that I'm part of their story. I'm in the scene with them. It feels like the scene rests in the situation with the character. We're going to talk a bit more about that, but first we're going to watch a little clip. Would you like to say something about the clip, Lenny?
Yeah, so I think this is the clip where they kiss for the first time. We shot it actually fairly early in the process of the show. I think it was within the first week. And it was a really good test for the instincts that we all had around pace and that something as simple as that, like as unremarkable as that event, could carry such kind of emotion and atmosphere. So and again, the instinct was that you didn't have to make it kind of glossy, or like you didn't have to be knowing in its presentation. You could be really kind of listening and watching as a filmmaker, and creating a sense of presence, that you really, that as a viewer, you're really there with them in the room, which is a hard thing to do, but I think when it works, the kind of impact of the material is so much stronger. You know, it really feels like you've experienced important with them, and not just being told, oh look, they've kissed for the first time and they're both excited about it. So that space, I mean, working with great people like Susie Lavelle, the cinematographer, and in the right back to the writing, making sure that right back to the conception of the show as these 12 episodes for quite a short book, you know, all of these decisions are based on the hunch that we all had that that you could make something quiet and really powerful. I mean, I think one of the discussions that did happen with you know, broadcasters as we were finalizing the series was, do we need to be a bit more energetic at the very beginning of the first episode? In other words, is there a danger that people will just sort of drift away? But I think everybody in the end had the courage to say, no, the story works if it's told like this. It doesn't work if we try and make it too sort of, you know, sassy and smart and hooky. And that was the gamble. And but I think there's no other way of doing it. There's no other way of telling this story except with space and a certain kind of careful attention that would lead to the strength of what we made in the end.
You know, you were saying the other day that you like me. But by the photocopier, you said it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you mean like as a friend or what?
No. Not just as a friend.
Yeah, I thought that might be implied. I just wasn't sure. See, I'm just a little confused about what I feel. I think it'd be awkward in school if something happened with us.
No one would have to know. That was nice.
All right, what are you laughing for?
Nothing.
Well, you're acting like you've never been kissed before.
I haven't.
Don't tell anybody in school about this, okay?
Like I talk to anyone at school.
Ed, some have said that Normal People is revolutionary in its normalness. Any comments on that?
Revolutionary is a big word. I mean, I think what Sally managed to do is to write a story of these two incredibly well-crafted and vivid characters that make us feel a really strong connection to them, and make them make them cease to almost be fictional characters and to be kind of people who we imagine are in our world or in our orbit somehow, and people with whom we have a relationship ourselves, even though technically we don't in the real world. We may, as literary characters, have a relationship with them. And that's, I mean, that's her great gift, actually. She just writes deceptively simply. It's incredibly accessible. You can read it and really respond to it as a very young reader, and indeed as someone who is, kind of very mature, if not old. And, the audience for the show reflects that. We've had, and for the book, it's loved and cherished by people of all ages, right up to people in their 80s and 90s. I think that, Lenny as a filmmaker has a similar gift to Sally as a novelist. And what I mean by that is that he somehow in all his work, I think, it somehow removes the lens between you, the viewer, and the actors on screen. And so that he creates a kind of real immediacy and intimacy between you and the characters. And again, in that sense that you kind of, you really feel you know them. And I remember at points during post-production, when we'd watch us together, and we were very early on very excited by what we were seeing, and then later in the day, kind of having this sort of ghost of having had a very intense conversation with someone, or had some very intense kind of engagement with someone, and then remembering that actually I'd just seen a cut of the show earlier on, and that it wasn't another person, it was watching some drama. And so I think that, and I think that kind of thing does sort of make it feel very present. And I think when you say normal, I think normal in a kind of extraordinary way, if that makes sense. In other words, it's kind of the very best experiences of normality, where actually you just have a very lovely, simple engagement with another human being, and you have some kind of empathy with them, or you have some understanding of them. And I guess that's, maybe when we're at our best as normal people going about our business.
It's interesting what you're saying about the intimacy, Ed. And I think that also has something to do with the tone and the visual that you put into the series. Lenny, can you say something about how you work with that?
Well, so, in a very, there's all sorts of ways of addressing that. I suppose I'm always interested in how, what sort of attention a viewer is paying in a scene. Are they receiving something, or are they discovering something? Are they hunting? I like a sense of sort of investigation. Like you're super close and you have access, but at the same time, you have a sense that something that, like a deeper under sort of just around the corner, and there's a way of making people need to kind of lean in, and I don't know what it is about that, but it opens you up emotionally, I think, as a viewer in a way that maybe other styles don't. And so to do that, it's just very careful conversations with our cinematographer, using close-ups in a very particular way. Some very similar close-ups wouldn't do it, and I don't know, in this case I'm using very narrow depth of field, not being too much on the eye line of the characters. Sometimes you are, but often you're kind of slightly off, which gives you a feeling of, like, I don't know, that you would love to lean round more, or there's a sort of invitation or a sense that there's another dimension to be found. Not using unnecessary camera movement at all, really, but shooting handheld in a subtle way so that actors are free to make small adjustments and change and kind of play it slightly differently each time, and the camera operator has permission to track that and follow it and readjust, and that all does into how you experience. And then we shot, like, in some very simple decisions, we shot on old lenses, a very limited number of old lenses, which are, I find, very kind of, I don't know, atmospheric in what they do to the image. It's very boldly lit by Susie Lavelle, like really, her choices are very, in a way, it's hard to pinpoint because it doesn't scream at you from the image, and that's the way we both wanted it. It shouldn't announce itself to you as you watch it, but she's not afraid to light with a single source and to have very kind of dim and dark sections of the frame, and all of those things add to a kind of truthfulness, I think, that's cumulative. It's like making a painting, lots and lots of little strokes, and if you get it right, it's a three-dimensional image, and that's what we're trying to do all the time. and we also adjust scenes if they're not if we find something that works out slightly better, or if the actors if it's not real or right, we just make those adjustments, and that's always the kind of the test. Do we believe it? Does it feel real? Does it continue to compel us to watch?
There are also gems in time and retrospective narrative in the storyline. Can you say something about why and how you wanted to structure the series around that kind of narrative?
I mean, I think we all talked about this. Probably, I think at the beginning of the process, I felt actually, this is something I was really wrong about. I felt that the show in the end would have more, would be more like the novel in that respect, because the novel has many jumps in time. And sometimes for just a small visit to a moment, and other times for a whole episode to take it to happen, and then we return to the present tense. I thought we would be doing a lot more of that. But actually, in comparison to the novel, it's much more of a linear development. And I don't know. I think that's partially because that's what screen storytelling does best. It's that word again, kind of presence or something it just feels like you're in the present tense and you're watching things as they happen. But there are some places where it really did make sense to revisit things that had sort of happened earlier, and perhaps Emma, because Emma was so involved in the script stage of everything, she'd be somebody to talk about those places where we really did hang on to it.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the crucial parts is around the point in episode 6 into episode 7 where the relationship breaks down, and in the book that involves two quite significant you find out how both character has experienced that at very different times in the book, and it's revealed to be a very different version of that moment, that they don't experience that scene in the same way. And we talked quite a lot about how to tackle that, and we rewrote that scene a lot of times, playing with the idea that they're not hearing each other in the same way, or that they really literally thought that somebody, that Marianne said something that Connell said something that they didn't say. Getting that right was really hard, because in the novel you do just read it as a paragraph and that's Marianne's version, and then you read it as Connell's version. So again, as Lenny said, the key was to find the most truthful version of it. And actually, although we shot one version of it, I think that was part of the storytelling that was really found in the edit, of just exactly how we could make that work. And I think that actually it's really worth also talking about how the editing was such a key process in the next layer of the storytelling of this one, because as Lenny said, we had different time jumps, and then we sometimes reverted to something more linear, or we had split perspectives and we ended up kind of weighting it in one direction. And I think that Lenny's editor that he works with on everything, Nathan Nugent, has a really excellent storytelling skill, but also he had a really innate understanding of how the mood and the space and the tension in the story worked. So at any point where the kind of what we thought had been a sort of fairly working scene sort of dipped a bit interest or kind of lost you a little bit, he really knew how to kind of pull you back into the story, or make a jump forward, or do something really quite artistic to kind of hold you in the moment. And I think that that's a really, really big part of this book, and it's some of the craft that's different to the novel, but true to the spirit of it, I think. We are going to watch a little clip now, which I'm using. It's not the one that you talked about. It's another clip. It's from New Year's Eve. You want to say something about that, Emma, before we see it? Well, this is a lovely kind of a lovely clip, because it pulls some of the images from the early clip, and it captures that sense of. I think it's really good at capturing how far they've come in the series, and it uses a sort of flashback that we didn't tend to do throughout the show, but really pulls you in. So enjoy.
All right. Hey, what's the crack? You all right? Happy New Year. Happy New Year too.
So nice to see you. You look amazing. So do you. You look gorgeous. How are you getting on? How are you?
Happy New Year. How are you? Good, good. What's your drink?
Would you like? No, no.
Give me a second. Give me a second. I'm gonna put it in.
Marianne Furevold.
I love you.
I love you too.
It makes me cry every time I see it. It's lovely. And it also has music into it. And I must ask you, music, Lenny, it feels like that has also been a part of the narrative. Can you say something about the use of music?
Sure. Yes, I think it's the first time in anything that I've done where I've used, tracks, songs, but I think there was no doubt that they would, contemporary pieces of music that, in a way, the characters themselves may have listened to, or that somehow operate in the space around this story, that they would play a part. And I think songs do a lot of work in the series as a whole because they allow you moments to reflect on and digest emotionally what you've just seen, or they help to underline a certain kind of beautiful, melancholy, atmospheric kind of space. But so the music really is in two parts. There are those songs which we were helped a lot by two wonderful music supervisors, Juliet Martin and Maggie Phillips, but also all of us pitched in ideas. I love listening to music. Nathan, the editor that Emma mentioned, is a great music person. So lots of the songs came in all sorts of unusual ways. But then also Stephen Rennicks, the composer, who I've worked with on everything that I've done, he did all the original music. And that sort of is a thematic backbone through the show. So that both strands are doing quite different things, but both are doing very important things, and music taken as a whole is a huge part of the show. It's been really nice to see the reaction to the music choices. People seem to really feel that they are appropriate, and the playlists are listened to a lot on Spotify, and that's nice. It makes us feel that we were on the right, in the right territory when we made those choices.
Would you say, Ed, that music is now something to to take into consideration when you're actually developing a show?
I mean, I think I don't think we talked about it that much until we actually got into the edit. I mean, obviously Stephen was part of it, always part of it from the very beginning, and Lenny and he would have had conversations. And I suspect that we probably ended up using more kind of tracks and, pre-existing songs than we maybe initially thought we would. And it was also something that in conversations with the broadcasters, it was something that they were really encouraging of, and we had Maggie as an American music supervisor and Juliet is Irish. So we had that kind of collaboration going on as well. And as it turned out, quite a lot of Irish artists in the show, which we're really happy about. without kind of necessarily totally intending that. It just worked out, and we kind of leaned into that as we go. But sorry, to answer your question, I mean, yes, I think it depends on the project. I think when we, you know, I think if we were tackling something like this again, something that's very contemporary, that's very in the moment, very in the zeitgeist, I think it's really useful to use music, because I think that just also helps to give, particularly, with something that maybe is set sort of in a very specific place like Ireland. I think it also helps to kind of internationalize it, because I think that people have a kind of common response to songs and music, and the iconography of all of that, I think, helps you mark out the interior lives of the characters. So yes, but I don't think, in some things it's really, really important and crucial, and other things possibly less so. But certainly in this case, I think we learned a lot actually by leaning into those opportunities, both Stephen's music and the songs that we license, etc.
I have one question about the visual. What happened in the final end on episode 9 in the end credit? That's the only place where it's not the end credit, it's not on black. It's a beautiful. Yeah, you're laughing, Emma. Tell me.
Well, it's just
What
so
was that all
it's
about?
just so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. I think all of us. I mean, Lenny, it was you and Nathan that decided, but I think when we saw that shot in the rushes, I think we all knew that it was just like glue. Your eyes were just stuck to it. It was so beautiful, and the emotion holds. And I think we all loved the idea that we could do something different there. That's the simple version of that.
It worked. We often talk about target audience when we are creating and developing shows. Did you have a specific audience you want to aim for, Ed?
Well, I mean, it was commissioned by, originally the show was commissioned by BBC Three, which is, if you like, the kind of the channel in BBC. It's digital, and it's oriented towards a younger audience. And Piers Wenger, the controller of drama, I think is very conscious of making drama series that appeal to a younger audience. So I think that in a way our demographic was, in terms of what the commissioners were looking at, was probably younger. But actually, as with the book, I think it's turned out that, while hopefully people of that age really, enjoyed the show, and they're obviously people who are close in age to the characters in the show. But I think while that, the show was originally commissioned by BBC Three, which is the channel in BBC which is, most targeted at a younger audience. I think it's probably, I don't know, 15s to 35 or something like that. And the BBC are super conscious of making drama for that audience. So I think that was a large part of Piers Wenger's motivation in commissioning the show, was to serve that audience. But I think, like the book, it's ended up appealing, to much, much older audiences as well. And that's, I suppose, both anecdotal and actually factual. I mean, we certainly, a lot of people in our own lives, a lot of our older relatives, in some cases, much, much older relatives, my 91-year-old mother-in-law, for instance, really, really enjoyed the show. But also actually getting the information back from BBC and Hulu, they were surprised by the number of people over 55, for instance, who were watching the show. So I think it maybe, it sort of, it creates different emotions and different responses in different age groups. You have a different response to it, but hopefully no less powerful in the different age groups. So we're really happy about that. I mean, we probably set out for it to kind of just appeal to people who connected with the audience, sorry, with the characters. We didn't really set out to kind of connect to a particular audience in how we made it or went about making it. That wasn't really part of our conversation.
And some say go very local and then you go global, because it's all about universal feelings. Lenny, the book is set in 2008. Is that correct? I have a 19-year-old daughter, and for her, that is like, 30 years ago. It's like ages ago. How aware were you and how to create something that still should feel authentic for youth in 2020?
I mean, I think it's probably a little later. I think it's probably set more like 14, 15, 16, something like that. So not quite as far away as that. I mean, the thing about it is things seem to be moving so quickly these days that it's impossible to be contemporary. Looking at anything now on TV where people are hugging and kissing and sitting in restaurants or going to bars feels like 1,000 years ago. But I think I don't think we just let it sit in the kind of more or less contemporary world. We probably set it in our own heads around 2018 to 19 would have been the middle section, and I think so. It's still it completely resonates now. It still has all of those aspects of the lives of the characters that people of 19 or 20 I hope realize or I hope recognize as part of their lives. But the notion of capturing the contemporary moment, at these days it's very specific. Is it like post March 2020 or is it December 2019? They're completely different, totally different these days. So God knows what it'll be like in another 2 months.
No, because in one way it feels like it's very timeless, the show. I mean, they don't use their mobile phones so much, and it's the music is from every kind of age, so it feels timeless. But then again, love is timeless. I want to ask Ed. You said something in the beginning about format and publishing. What was your strategy? Because you were publishing on both on the BBC Three Player and in linear. Can you say something about that, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, it was commissioned originally by BBC Three, which is is a digital channel. So they're, reasonably agnostic about length. And actually, even though we hit upon making a show that's 12 half hours, some of the episodes are quite a bit shorter than half an hour, and some are quite a bit longer. So it's within a band, and that's great. That just gave us great freedom, and it just meant that we sort of made the very best individual episode that we could in any given case. But we also certainly on BBC Three in BBC I should say, we always knew that there would be a kind of a strategy where they would move from digital to linear, and that's so it happened with Fleabag and with Killing Eve, that it starts on BBC Three in a digital world and then goes to BBC One in a linear world, but it goes late at night at 10:30 at night. So in a sense, duration doesn't matter so much. So that was a plan at least. But then when it came to actually broadcasting the show, BBC decided that they wanted to amalgamate 2 episodes together for the linear broadcast on BBC One and show it at an earlier time at 9:00. So just post Watershed. And I think that was to do with, what they felt about the show, but also about the fact that we were in a different viewing world. It was during the time of, coronavirus, if you like, and that people's sort of responses to what they were seeing on television were quite different. And so they took that opportunity to show the show in a kind of more of a prime time time slot. And that involved a little bit of engineering on our side in terms of program length, but very little actually, as it turned out. And then internationally, Hulu is a digital channel, so it didn't particularly matter to them. And actually, as it turned out, most of the people to whom we've sold the show have been able to manage quite well with the ideal length. Although we have different formats, but most people have taken a 12 half-hour format, and that seems to have worked quite well.
Yeah, I think we are much more open-minded to not being such in a slot way of thinking. That's probably the future. But could you see any difference between the audience on the different platforms in age, demographics? Emma?
I mean, the information that we have is that generally the kind of younger viewers watched it on the digital platform, as you'd expect, and they binged it, and it was available as a box set, so they could watch it all in one go. And then, sort of as you'd expect, there was the sort of linear broadcast played to an older demographic, and I suppose probably the kind of demographic that, as Ed had said, wasn't the sort of first priority to get. The kind of key for the BBC was for BBC Three to play to the younger audience and pull more people into that platform. So I think the BBC was really, really happy with the fact that it did connect with that audience and that they came back Not only that they binged it, but there's quite high figures of people who've binged it 2 or 3 times. So they just keep watching over and over again, and it's just quite an intense experience. But yeah, I think that having it available in those different ways means that anyone can find it in the way that they want to, you know, and I suppose even the people who are watching it in the UK in a linear way could then go off and watch more episodes if they really got into it. So it sustained its audience on linear in a really good way. So actually some of those people were just in the pattern of watching it on that week and it suited them, and the rest just devoured it.
Lenny, it is now premiering all over the world. Have you had any different responses on how the different countries have embraced normal people?
I mean, because you know, everybody's involvement is via their phones. Our involvement with, you know, the life of the show has been through the phone and social media, and then reports from broadcasters and things. I think I'm probably, my knowledge of it is much better in the Anglophone world. So where it seems to have had, again, amazingly a similar response in places as different as Australia, New Zealand, the US, and Ireland and England, and the UK generally. So that's been fascinating to watch, the same sorts of responses from people. The other, and then I see stuff in languages that I don't understand, but there are lots of exclamation marks and hearts. So I'm getting the sense that the responses are positive. I mean, it's interesting to me. I'd be really fascinated to know how the show plays in places where the culture is very different, you know, and I'd like to know, you know, how it plays in India or in you know, Eastern Europe or Russia, and I'd be fascinated and hope we get feedback from those releases as they come. But so far, it's been about those two characters and a kind of deep investment in them by audiences. That's what comes over again and again.
Yeah, it's obviously been quite an adventure for everyone who has participated in this, not only us who have watched it as an emotional roller coaster. Can you say something about what was, Emma, what was most fun doing this series?
Oh, well, I think, I'll be honest, I think doing a series with your friends, making a show with people that you really like to work with, and that expanded to, you know, to Daisy and Paul, who I feel like, you know, we all became very close to, and the larger crew who hadn't worked with before. There was a really lovely sense that everybody who worked on the show loved the book, enjoyed working together, and there was a great kind of great sense of collaboration. So that kind of creates fun in little different pockets, you know, just enjoying listening to music together, or enjoying the thrill of seeing a scene where you think, God, that worked out really well. Or on the flip side, everyone putting their heads together and going, God, how do we make this bit work? You know, so it was, I think that was fun for me.
So Lenny, what do you want your audience to be left with after watching Normal People?
I think in something like this, it's always about a feeling of that you've had an emotional, you know, that your emotions have been evoked in a really deep way. You know, I want people to have felt something, and I think for the people who I've spoken to who love the show, it's been about an echo in their own lives or their memories or things that they long to have experienced but didn't, or whatever. There's an echo of the emotional intensity that the characters are feeling in the audience, I think. And I think empathy, it's a word Ed used earlier, like always feel that that a piece of work that allows an audience to empathize with other people and to, I hope, sort of bring that, some small part of that back into their own lives. That's a thing that's very worthwhile.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that can wrap up our session. I would like to thank you all. And I would say that normal people show us that good storytelling can open up our hearts and our minds.
Thank you, Marianne.